Howdy, folks.
Welcome to a world of fantasy with 7 magical lands of timeless fun. The Magic Kingdom, where happily ever afters happen every day.
Please stand clear of the doors.
Hey, y'all. Welcome to the WDW Reflections Podcast, your unofficial guide through Disney World memories and their connections to the parks we know and love today. I am one of your hosts. I am Dewey. With me today are my podcast travel buddies, Ron and Tony. Good morning, Tony. How's it going, buddy?
But I'm doing okay. How about you guys?
How about you, Ron? Good morning, buddy. How are you today?
Good morning, guys. I'm doing well. Looking forward to the discussion today and happy to be here.
Tomorrowland Transit Authority Metroliner nonstop, now departing Rocket Tower Plaza Station for a round-trip Super Skyway tour.
So this week, our main topic, we've chosen a classic Disney attraction, the WEDWAY People Mover. The WEDWAY People Mover. So the WEDWAY People Mover actually goes back way, way before building Walt Disney World, and even before it was located in Disneyland. The initial technology utilized in the People Mover was originally designed for the Ford Pavilion at the 1964 World's Fair in New York for the Magic Skyway attraction. So that attraction was the one that instead of being in a ride vehicle, you were in a Ford automobile. So they had, Mustangs and stuff, actual cars on the track that took you around the Magic Skyway attraction. So that was super cool. But that was the technology was first used there for the World's Fair. And that design used rubber wheels in the center of the track, and it propelled the vehicles moving forward instead of the vehicles propelling themselves. And the ride system was such a success, and it really just fascinated the riders, and that they brought it back to Disneyland in California. And the ride system their version of the People Mover opened on July 2nd, 1967. So just a couple of years after the end of the New York World's Fair in 64, 65. The system in Disneyland used a circular load-unload area, similar to what would eventually be built in Walt Disney World. When Disney World was built, it used a different propulsion system. No longer was it using those rubber wheels in the center that would push or propel the cars forward. The one in Disney World eventually would use a system called a solid state linear induction motor, which sounds super fancy and complicated, but really pretty cool technology. So early Tomorrowland was lacking in year one of Walt Disney World. When it opened in 1971, there were only 4 attractions. Even by the end of the year in 1971, remember, Disney World opened in October, and lots of places in the park had phased openings, different things would open. But by the end of the year of 1971, Tomorrowland still only had 4 attractions. So planned for a later opening in what was being called Phase 2 of Tomorrowland, construction began on that phase in early of 1973. So for about 2 years, about a year and a half of Disney World, they only had those 4 attractions in Tomorrowland. They knew more needed to be added. So during the planning phases for Disney World's Tomorrowland, the People Mover was always something that was on the plans. They knew they wanted to bring that successful technology from the World's Fair and from the People Mover at Disneyland. They knew they wanted to bring it over. And in the early phases of that planning, the People Mover was supposed to be housed in the same building that was going to be the Spaceport Ride. At that time, it was being called a Spaceport. And the entrance to both attractions would have been in that same show building. The original plans called for a much longer route than was eventually built. I mean, we know that the same old song and dance, even back in the 70s, it's always about the money. So they had this grand scale and this grand plan of how it was going to be this gigantic route around all of Tomorrowland. And of course, things always get scaled back and and made smaller and stuff like that. But this extra track would have taken it out of the side of what was then called the Spaceport building. Basically, if you're looking at it now, the side of Space Mountain, where Tron is being built, it was supposed to come out of the side there on the side of Spaceport. And it would have taken you all the way down through the over the Tomorrowland Speedway, which of course then was called the Grand Prix Raceway. It would have made a loop turning around pretty close to what is now new Fantasyland, down there where the Dumbos and stuff are. It would have gone all the way down there and made a loop and turned back around past what was then 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, right by Mad Hatter's Tea Party. And then it would have gone into the building where it does actually go into now, the Mickey Star Trader building, and then it would have caught up to its current configuration. It would have gone along the top of the Mission to Mars building, which, later became Stitch's Great Escape, and over to the other side where now Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger Spin is. But back then it was If You Had Wings. And even those two buildings, even when they built them in the early 70s, those tracks were there as part of phase one above If You Had Wings and Mission to Mars. Those two tracks were there, but at the end of the buildings, they just had walls built where the track was just blocked off, and those two areas up there sat capped off for over 2 years while they were still planning and I guess probably saving all their pennies for that phase two construction to begin. So as plans changed, the Spaceport Ride eventually became Space Mountain. That's what we know and love today. And the ride was unfortunately shortened, no longer going out past the Speedway and the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. It basically followed the configuration that we see today. The load and unload area, or the station, I guess you could call it, was moved out of the Spaceport, or the later Space Mountain building, and actually came to be in the center of Tomorrowland, actually very much like it was in Disneyland. Has that center, that building in the center of Tomorrowland, where now we know has the launching pad on the bottom. The center section is the load unload circular area for the People Mover. And then the top was Starjets. Back in the 70s, it was called Starjets. So the Grand Prix Raceway was slightly modified to make room for the construction of the new Space Mountain building and the addition of the People Mover track. And this dedicated load and unload station that was moved to the center allowed for the Starjets to be built up on top, again, just like it was over in Disneyland. So they used a lot of the same ideas and probably lessons learned from the Disneyland attraction, and that's why they moved it there to the center. Now, originally, there was going to be a garage and a maintenance bay when the track was really long and going all the way out past the Grand Prix Raceway. There was supposed to have been a spur, if you will, off of that track that was going to lead to a garage and a maintenance bay for ride vehicles. But when that route was shortened, they decided to go ahead and use part of Space Mountain. And there's actually a garage and a maintenance bay inside the Space Mountain building. So I don't know if you guys knew that or not, but it actually, there's a spur off of the ride track inside Space Mountain where they can take ride vehicles in there to do a little bit of maintenance and stuff on them. So the linear induction system, let's talk about that for a second. That is, it's actually pretty cool technology. Like I said, the original used those rubber wheels that just spun all the time. And as a ride vehicle came across that spinning rubber wheel, it would propel the ride vehicle. This linear induction system actually uses 630 motors placed around the track. And these motors create a magnetic field. And this magnetic field has a sensor in the track And as one of the ride vehicles approaches that part of the track, it engages the magnetic field, and it underneath the ride vehicles, each one has a steel and aluminum plate, and that magnetic vehicle or that magnetic field grabs onto that steel plate underneath the ride vehicle and propels it forward. So it's basically, you know, magnets attract and push and pull. That's what it's doing. That magnetic field is created, and it basically pulls that car to it propels it until it gets to the next motor. Like I said, 630 of those are along the track for the People Mover in Disneyland. I'm sorry, in Disney World. So these linear induction motors, or I guess they actually have an acronym, a LIM, L-I-M, they're spaced 10 feet apart, and that allows the 5-car trains to basically be over one of those motors at all times. So it basically pushes from one and then gets to the next one and pushes it and pulls to the next and pulls to the next. And it's just this continuous firing of these magnetic fields that pulls those steel plates, and it keeps the ride moving at all times.
Hey, do you know if the tires were placed at the same distance?
Do I know if what?
The tires were at the same distance as the motors?
I don't know the distance in the rubber tires for the original attractions. My guess is they probably had to have more of them, because the state of the magnetic field is that it's a constant. So it's always pulling at the same strength. So the car is always over the top of one. It's either the front is being pulled by one or the rear is being pushed. So that maintains that constant speed.
I was going to say, because I don't remember, it's been a while since I've rode it, but I don't really remember it being jerky at all, like you're feeling like you're being caught and then pulled and then pushed or anything.
That's right. That's what they said about the LIM, the linear induction motor system. It doesn't do that because it's always in a state of movement. It's either pulling from the front or pushing from the back. So it's always very smooth, and you're always over one of those motors, one of those magnetic fields, because there's one about every 10 feet. So there's, like I said, 630 of them along the track. So that's a bunch.
The technology behind something like that is just astounding. And it sounds like something that was being planned more on a grander scale than just for use in the theme park.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And we will talk about that here soon. But I mean, goodness gracious, y'all, think about it. They built the construction of it started in 75, or I mean, it opened in 75. So construction started in 73. So, I mean, goodness gracious, when I think back to the 70s, it seems like the dark ages to me, you know? So it really amazes me. I mean, we went to the moon in 1969, so I guess I shouldn't be surprised. But, you know, the fact that they were building these kinds of things in the late 60s, early 70s really is fascinating to me. But yeah, so those limbs, the magnetic fields, the slowing or stopping, if they wanted to do that to one of the vehicles, which doesn't happen a lot because these things are constantly moving, but slowing or stopping is achieved by the limbs magnetic field being reversed. So they can basically just reverse the magnetic field, and where it was pulling, now it can push. And if they want to go backwards, so they just reverse the magnetic field, which to me also sounds incredibly complicated. It's probably not. It's probably just a flip of a switch, but it sounds incredibly complicated to me.
Well, at the time, in the early 70s, wasn't at the time they were planning Epcot and trying to make it into something that was technologically very much advanced?
Absolutely.
And this is something that this is probably part of their scientific team that they had involved to try to come up with new ways of moving people around.
100% correct. That's one of the things close to the end of this. I will talk about some of the plans for what they had hoped the People Mover system was going to be. So a little foreshadowing there, Tony. Well done, sir. So the Disney World version can utilize up to 30 trains. What was that, Ron?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm interested at the end to see if there was any true application of this technology? I'm wondering if there's a certain city that maybe be using it.
I wonder. I think I have it in my notes. So we'll see when we get there. We'll see. So yes, so 30 trains on the Disney World version on the People Mover there, and it can carry up to 3,600 guests per hour on the 4,600 feet long track. So you can travel just about a mile. It's about, a mile is around 5,600 feet. So at 4,600 feet, this track is just shy of a mile long, and the ride takes you about 10 minutes to get around this circle tour of Tomorrowland.
But doesn't it feel like the 10 most glorious minutes while you're on there?
It does.
You don't want to get off.
And I've been on it, because sometimes there's no line. So
yeah,
there's times when you get back to the loading and unloading station that I'll just say, hey,
jump
can we go again?
On. Yeah.
And sometimes they don't even make you get off. If there's no line, they're like, sure. And they'll just wave at you.
Way back in the day, there used to not be a line for this. And we used to go on over and over.
Absolutely. And there were times when if we had a fast pass or something for Buzz or whatever, we would just ride the TTA for, I don't know, 2 or 3 times waiting for our fast pass window to open. So yeah, back in the day before the Magic Kingdom was a mob scene, you could just walk right on to the People Mover whenever you wanted to. So when Carousel of Progress was set to close at Disneyland in 1973, they decided to move the Carousel of Progress all the way across to the East Coast, actually back to the East Coast, because you'll remember it was located for about a year. It was over in the World's Fair in 1964 in New York. So after the World's Fair, they packed it up and sent it to Disneyland, and it stayed there for 5 years or so. And they packed it back up and sent it back to Disney World. So when it got to Disney World in Tomorrowland, to help with the scarcity of attractions there, they decided that they were going to, use Walt Disney's Carousel of Progress to help improve the attraction list over at Tomorrowland. The Progress City diorama that had been housed on the second floor of Carousel of Progress back at the 1964-65 World's Fair had also been taken to the Disneyland attraction, and it sat on the second floor of the Disneyland attraction in its entirety. Excuse me. It was a gigantic model. So when they brought it to the East Coast for its permanent home in Disney World, they had to really scale it down. The model that you see on the People Mover track today is not even a quarter of the size of the original Progress City model. It was a gigantic model. So although now much smaller than the original massive model, the Progress City model was placed along the People Mover track, and it can actually still be seen today. It's still in there in that little dark tunnel when you're coming through. It's there on your left, and it's really pretty awesome that, again, that's another piece of Walt that is there for us to see. That was the original model that was the supposed plan for what would eventually be the city of Epcot, which was Walt Disney's original dream, his grand plan for the Florida project.
I'm sure a lot of folks don't even realize that, because it seems part of the fantasy while you're on this scientific ride, and you see this really futuristic city. You don't necessarily think that that's really going to be built, but that was Walt's idea.
That was the whole idea. It was some of the early planning for his plan for the city of Epcot. It was gigantic, and he wasn't planning a theme park in Florida. The theme park was just going to be built there to finance his grand dream of his city of Epcot. So that model was his ultimate dream. And, unfortunately it didn't happen.
But I think it's also very interesting as you look at development today. Even he was so much before his time, and people that are developing now are making not so much the futuristic but you have dining and shopping and living all in one area, and that's exactly what Epcot was going to be, a truly working society, right? And developers have really taken that all over the country and continue to use that ideal. So I mean, it just fascinates me how forward thinking Walt Disney truly was.
Absolutely. He was a study of city planning and trying to make things more, efficient, and to make things more environmentally friendly, and all of those things that nobody was talking about in the 1960s. He was certainly way ahead of his time. But you're right, Tony, that I don't know that everybody knows that is what that model is that, was supposed to be the vision for Epcot. And Ron, I think you're right too, that nobody back then was doing those kinds of things. And now today people are incorporating in any major city. When they're doing these revitalization projects, you see shopping districts and, touristy areas and stuff like that. And that was certainly came from the mind of Walt Disney and his Imagineers. So the WEDWAY People Mover project cost just over $10 million to build, and it opened in 1975. It officially opened on July 1st, 1975. And get this, you'll like this, Ron. I wonder if you went on it when you were there in 76. The WEDWAY People Mover, as it was known then, was an e-ticket attraction when it opened in July of 1975. So we've talked in the past, we've talked about your first trip and how you used the tickets and stuff. I wondered, do you have any recollection? Did you use one of those big time expensive e-tickets for the People Mover?
Surprisingly, I do remember riding it, and fortunately, it seems like we were a little bit disappointed with it, but we really enjoy it now. But again, you got to remember, we're coming from a background similar to Tony, where it's all thrill and fast moving, and sometimes we as the kids just didn't appreciate some of the theming and everything that Disney brought. But yeah, I actually remember pretty vividly, because you could see Space Mountain, and we had not rode Space Mountain yet, and you could see the cars zooming by in those windows, and it was just added to the excitement of what was to come.
That's awesome. Yeah, so it was, I mean, I guess because of the cost and because of the how advanced that technology was, that they designated it an e-ticket. But by the end of 1976, it was actually dropped down to a D-ticket attraction. So it only lasted as an e-ticket for about a year. And then by the end of 76, they had changed it to a D-ticket. So the original People Mover.
See, I wonder, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt again, but now I'm wondering if when we went in 76, it seems like we were there in July, so I don't know if it would have been an E or a D ticket at that point. But
yeah, in my research, I didn't find anything about a specific date of when they made the switch from E to D ticket. I just did in the reading, it said by the end of 76, it had gone to a D. So I'm not sure how expensive your ride on the People Mover was that year, but it was either an E or a D for sure. So the original People Mover was narrated by well-known Disney voice actor Jack Wagner. So the same voice for the monorail, the same "Please stand clear of the doors" guy. He was the original narration for the original People Mover. The narration explained what the rider was looking at around the circle tour of Tomorrowland. And this narration lasted until a change was made in 1985. And this change added in a high-pitched computer narrator named Auric One, and he was known as your computer. The narration was similar in content to the original Jack Wagner narration, although it did contain a few attempts at comedy, as he acted as your tour guide through Tomorrowland.
An early version of Rex, it sounds like there.
I was thinking the same thing. It has that same high-pitched, Pee Wee Herman kind of voice, electronic sounding voice, and he was at times a little silly and things, very much like Rex from Star Tours. I thought the same thing, Tony. That's funny. So that voice in 1985 did replace the Jack Wagner narration. But more changes were coming and beginning to appear in Tomorrowland in the late 80s and early 90s. New color schemes began to appear, changing that futuristic stark white landscape of early Tomorrowland as pinks and blues were added as accent colors around the land. So if you guys remember, early Tomorrowland was this, it was supposed to be like our future, the future of humankind. So everything was very sleek and bright white, like the Apollo missions, those Saturn V rockets and everything. You know, they were the gigantic white rockets with USA on the side and everything. Most of Tomorrowland was followed that color scheme. Everything was even the giant monoliths that were in the entrance to Tomorrowland that had the fountains and everything on them. Those were all painted, you know, stark white, and all of the construction, all of the building materials and everything throughout Tomorrowland was all of that stark white to accompany the look of those, you know, the star jets looked like NASA rockets and all that stuff. But beginning in the late 80s and early 90s, they began adding those accent colors, because just around the corner on the horizon was the beginning of New Tomorrowland. And New Tomorrowland began in the early 90s. And by 94, 95 timeframe, that was when we saw some gigantic changes to what Tomorrowland would become. So the large circular building in the center of Tomorrowland that housed the Star Jets and the WEDWAY People Mover were both rethemed for the new Tomorrowland refurbishment. The Star Jets became the Astro Orbiter, getting all new ride aesthetics with revolving planets that circled around the ride vehicles. And there were, you know, the planets would rotate and move around the axis around the circular ride. And at nighttime, those planets would light up and stuff. Very different looking than the stark white, because the planets were bright and orange and, you know, vibrant colors and things like that. The People Mover was also rethemed, and let's say it was renamed from the WEDWAY People Mover and then became the Tomorrowland Transit Authority Metroliner Blue Line. So say that 5 times fast. That is a mouthful. The Tomorrowland Transit Authority Metroliner Blue Line. And I know from my experience, and probably just about everybody else never called it that gigantic long name. They just called it the TTA for short. So the TTA, the Tomorrowland Transit Authority. So the WEDWAY People Mover, along with the Astro Orbiter, got those new name changes. The structure itself was also renamed to Rocket Tower Plaza Station. So that entire center building that has the launching pad in the bottom, the People Mover in the middle, or now the TTA, and then the Star Jets on top became the Astro Orbiter, and they named that entire complex Rocket Tower Plaza Station. So both of these attractions closed on January 10th of 1994 to begin this transformation, and they both reopened in June of 94 after those rehabs were complete. The actual ride for the TTA didn't get any cosmetic changes, but it did change along with the Astro Orbiter and everything like that. The work continued on New Tomorrowland because drastic changes were coming to the previous version of the land. What had begun with the addition of some pink and blue highlights to the original stark white landscape was completely transformed with bright neon lights lining just about every surface in Tomorrowland. So there was big, bright orange neon lights basically all the way down that main walkway through Tomorrowland. Lots of color where before it had been just that white NASA theme. Along with the bright colors, New Tomorrowland also contains a new all-around theme. No longer was it the future of mankind and what we thought humans were going to be interacting with and dealing with in our future. They changed that to a interplanetary gathering place for humans and aliens alike to meet and exchange commerce and ideas. So they added the interplanetary, galactic and interplanetary convention center. And that's when you started seeing things like alien encounter, the extraterrestrial alien encounter. And the TTA was incorporated into that storyline as well. It became now known as a means of transportation around that interplanetary convention center and other locations of interest around this bustling spaceport. So that was the new idea or the new theme for New Tomorrowland. It was during this refurbishment that some of the now iconic narration elements were introduced. The now familiar bong 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 tone that alerts riders to the new message that was coming on your circle tour of Tomorrowland. That's when it made its debut. It's also when the famous line, "Paging Mr. Morrow, Mr. Tom Morrow," and abrupt new narration elements were also added. Things like now approaching Walt Disney's Carousel of Progress and things like that. I'm sure you guys probably recognize, even though I'm doing a horrible imitation.
Yeah, it sounds pretty good to me.
You're too kind, Tony. You're too kind. But I know you guys recognize those. That was added in during the 1994 New Tomorrowland refurbishment.
Can I add, though, when they were paging Tom Morrow, that's because he was a character at the parks at the time. He was that Robin Williams animatronic that was inside that attraction that was taken over by Stitch.
That's correct. That's holy smokes, my mind just went blank. Give me a second. Timekeeper.
Timekeeper, that's right.
Timekeeper. I lost it.
That's okay. His name was Tom Morrow. And so
Tom Morrow, that's correct. And they were paging Mr. Tom Morrow. Very clever. You know, tomorrow, we're in Tomorrowland. Those Imagineers, they're so clever. All right. So, and that's how the TTA remained for the better part of 2 decades. It's hard to think about that, but it really remained mostly unchanged for almost 20 years. Periodic work did occur from time to time, you know, just slight enhancements, things like that. But nothing really changed the ride experience. But then in the late 2000s, some improvements and changes began to happen. In 2009, the TTA closed for a short time in order to add some new lighting effects. They installed some color-changing LED lighting systems along the track, which would enhance and mimic some of the bright colored neon that traced all along the Tomorrowland landscape. And these changes in 2009 also saw a narration change. So gone was the previous Peter Renaday version that had been present since 1994 with the New Tomorrowland refurbishment, and added was a new narration by voice actor Mike Brazel. And that narration featured information about other attractions that you can see along the TTA route, including the now, and this is my opinion, only my opinion, the thankfully defunct Stitch's Great Escape. As the narrator would tell you, your mission was to try and contain Experiment 626. And then Stitch would jump in, and I'm not going to try and do a horrible Stitch impression, but Stitch would jump in and say, "I don't think so," in that shrieky, annoying Stitch voice. It also featured introduction to the Monsters, Inc. laugh floor, and they also had a little voice excerpt of everybody's favorite monster, Roz. And she would beckon you or call you in to come help out and create some electricity for a Monstropolis. So some little voice inserts there from Stitch and Roz. So that was added in 2009. And my favorite of all these changes actually came in 2010, when the ride officially received a new name yet again. So the original WEDWAY People Mover changed to the the incredibly long Tomorrowland Transit Authority Metroliner Blue Line, or the TTA. But in 2010, they officially threw back to the original name of the attraction and renamed it the Tomorrowland Transit Authority People Mover. So back to the original name, the People Mover. I'm okay with calling it the TTA People Mover. I think that kind of gives it maybe a little bit of the best of both worlds. We still have the TTA, but now it's called the People Mover again. I never stopped calling it the People Mover anyway.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that in 2010 they actually came back and said, let's throw it back to the original and call it the People Mover again. So that made me very happy when that occurred back in 2010. In 2013, the Progress City model along the route received a much needed refurbishment. This thing had barely been touched, sitting almost in its original state from when it was installed and opened in 1975 with the opening of the People Mover. So it had sat there for, goodness gracious, don't make me do public math, but from 1975 up until 2013 when they refurbished the Progress City model. So that's a really long time. So they added some pretty cool new elements. You can see there's almost looks like skywriting above the city, and it says the City of Tomorrow, and they added LED lighting to the model. And I think at some point the Ferris wheels had stopped moving, so they fixed that and everything. So it definitely needed some love, and in 2013 finally got some. Then in 2014, Tomorrowland began receiving some color updates all around the land. And they began adding some bright oranges and reds and different color schemes like that. And actually, you can see those. They're still there today. The new paint job, I guess you could say, that Carousel of Progress got back in 2014. They painted over. You guys remember Carousel of Progress used to have those, like the gears, all the gears and spokes and things painted along the side. Well, now in 2014, with the refacing of some of Tomorrowland, they repainted Carousel of Progress up to all those red and oranges and yellows, those geometric shapes that went around the circular building. To go along with that, they also repainted some of the TTA, the People Mover, the speed ramps that take you up the hill to get to the second level. Those were painted in a bright orange configuration. And that really, adds some color, that those bright pops to the station there, and also to the Carousel of Progress. And then that's kind of it for changes and stuff to the ride system or anything like that made any significant changes to the riding experience. And it operated like that for about the next 6 years or so in this configuration, until January of 2020, when the ride experienced a short closure due to smoke being seen coming from the ride. So they closed the ride down in January 2020, and the Reedy Creek Fire Department came in and, made sure that it was safe, made sure there was no fire or anything like that, which, good news, they didn't find any fire, but they also were unable to determine the cause of the smoke. They did lengthy inspections, no fires, but also no discernible source of this smoke either. So after a few days, they brought it back online and started letting guests ride it again, until another problem piped up in February of 2020. And reports stated that two People Mover cars crashed into each other in February of 2020, resulting in another closure. And this closure was to be a bit more substantial than just a few days from the one in January. In fact, the ride closed even before the global pandemic forced the entire Walt Disney World Resort to close down in March of 2020. So not a whole lot is out there, not a lot of, certainly nothing official from Walt Disney that I could find from the Walt Disney World company or anything like that. Nothing about the two cars, smacking into each other, and not a whole lot of information about why it closed in February. but it did close before the pandemic closed the parks in March. When the parks reopened in July of 2020, the People Mover didn't reopen. It remained closed. And if you followed along with the My Disney Experience app, or if you looked at the website online, they kept adding dates of the reopening for the People Mover. And as those dates would slowly approach, then they would push that out again. And this closure that began in February of 2020 dragged on and on and on, with little or no comment made by Disney to explain the continued closure. They just kept changing the date, and that was about it. Finally, on April 27th of 2021, over a year had passed while this attraction, the People Mover, was closed. Finally, on April 27th, after more than a year, the refurbishment finally was completed, and Tomorrowland Transit Authority People Mover was reopened to guests. And since then, we're now recording this in October of 2021. I haven't seen or heard of any additional problems or closings or anything. So whatever the problem was, and again, to this date, Disney has not made any kind of statement or anything saying why it took so long to fix, but over a year it was closed. But thankfully, there haven't been any additional closings or additional work needed to it after it finally reopened again on April 27th of 2021. So the Tomorrowland Transit Authority People Mover is back and being enjoyed by guests again. And that's a fantastic bit of news. But that's not where the story ends. So Ron and Tony, both of you had a little foreshadowing there. Ron, I believe you were talking about you know that the People Mover system was added somewhere else in the country. And Tony, you talked about it's
I think I know what city may be using it, but I'm not positive.
All right. Well, I will reveal that to you in a minute. You can let me know if you were right. And then Tony, you mentioned that it was supposed to be used in Epcot as well. Epcot, the city, right? That's what you were referring to? You are right. So there were supposed to be other areas where the People Mover attraction was going to be used around the Walt Disney World Resort. Now, originally in the grand plan, there was supposed to be a monorail that was going to travel from the Epcot area. When I say Epcot here, I'm meaning the city, not the theme park. There was supposed to be a monorail that would leave the city of Epcot and travel down to the Lake Buena Vista Shopping Village, which that's what it was called then. It later became Downtown Disney, and now it's known as Disney Springs. But when Epcot was still going to be the city of the future, the plans were going to have a monorail traveling from the Epcot city to the Lake Buena Vista Shopping Village. And this monorail station would have connected to a People Mover system that would have circled around all of the shopping village and would have taken guests all around to the different locations. It would have several stops around the village, and it would also have traveled to neighboring hotels along that area. And there was supposed to be an office park built there as well that the People Mover would have taken people to. Unfortunately, the project was eventually abandoned. As we all know, the city of Epcot was not built, so they didn't have a need for a monorail to be taking from the city of Epcot to the shopping village. So unfortunately, that was scrapped. The original concept for the city of Epcot was also planned to have an intricate system of People Mover lines. And that would have enabled guests and visitors, or I guess that's the same thing. Guests and visitors are the same. So residents and guests, they would have been able to travel from the outer residential areas of the city, and they could have taken People Movers into the interior of the city where people would have worked. But sadly, with the passing of Walt Disney in December of 1966, the city of Epcot was never built. So this intricate system of People Movers was also never built. So then fast forward to the late 70s when they decided to take Epcot Center take the original vision of the city and transform it into a theme park. The theme park Epcot Center was actually supposed to have its own version of the People Mover. So you guys are probably familiar, I'm sure you are, that the two wings of Communicore that circled around the fountain there in the center of Epcot behind Spaceship Earth, those two circular buildings, they were supposed to house an elevated circular People Mover track. The buildings were built with elevated ceilings so they could accommodate the eventual addition of the People Mover. But again, sadly, this never came to be either. They never built the People Mover track. It was supposed to come in a later phase to Epcot Center, but sadly it was never built. And then now, with the demolition of one of the original Communicore buildings, it's completely gone. That's going to become the Moana attraction over on that side of Epcot Center. So since one of the original Communicore buildings is now gone, it's official that we'll never see that become a reality. We'll never see the People Mover be added to Epcot Center. And I, for one, am pretty sad about that. I think that would have been a really cool way to travel around the interior of the center of Epcot Center there, in what was at one time called Epcot Central. So that would have been cool. But unfortunately, that building's gone, and so were our dreams of having a People Mover in Epcot Center. And then finally, Ron, for you were talking about, you thought that there was a People Mover somewhere in the country. What's your guess? Do you think you know what city? What city are you thinking of?
My guess is Washington, D.C.
Oh, okay. You're half right, half wrong. So you're not wrong. I don't want to say you're wrong. You're half right. Let's say that. I'm going to give you half credit.
Okay.
Actually, there is a Disney, a company bought the People Mover system from Disney in 1979, and this is in the state of Houston, Texas. The People Mover project was sold and built in the city of Houston. The Houston airport purchased a WEDWAY system from the Disney company in 1979, and it was completed in 1981 at a cost of $13.5 million. And actually, that system is still in use today at the Houston airport. So that's actually pretty cool. I've never traveled through that airport, but someday, who knows, maybe when I'm a rich millionaire, I might fly to Houston just so I can jump on the Houston People Mover. I think that's pretty cool. So, Ron, you're not wrong, because there is indeed a People Mover style transit system beneath the city of Washington, D.C. It travels from the Capitol building and takes people to a couple of other government buildings underneath the city. But the reason why you're only half right is because the Disney company actually sold that division of the division that built the WEDWAY People Movers. They sold it in 1993. So when it was built in Washington, D.C., it was not built under the Disney umbrella, because that division of the company had actually been sold. But it is the same technology that was developed by Walt Disney Imagineers. And
how cool.
Yep. So I'm going to give you credit, because it's definitely the WEDWAY People Mover technology. It was just that system and that technology is no longer owned by Disney, because they sold it in 1993.
Have you ever rode it?
I have not. I've been in the Capitol a couple of times, like on field trips with my kids and things like that. But I never rode the actual system that's beneath the Capitol. I have not. You've been on it?
Yeah, I've been on it, and so that's why I knew immediately. I was like, "Wow, this is very Disney-esque," and so
you're 100% correct. It is those linear induction motors, the LEMs, that was developed by Disney for the People Mover system. It is that technology. It was just that division was sold before it was built. So the company that purchased it, and it actually the name of that company slips my mind right now, but when they bought it from the Disney company, they did in fact build that system beneath the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. So
when I wrote it, I don't believe it's exclusive to the congressman now, but when we wrote it, we had some tickets from our congressman and stuff, and we're able to write it that way. But I think it's open to the public now. I'm not positive.
That's cool. Yeah, I've seen it, and beneath there, I saw the station or whatever where you load on it and everything. And I know that the cars in both Houston and in the Washington D.C. version, the cars look completely different from the ones that are in Disney World. They actually they're enclosed. I think they have a roof and have glass and everything. So you're actually inside kind of like a monorail little car or whatever. But it is the same LEM or linear induction motor system, same technology used in both Houston and Washington D.C. So that's pretty cool that you've been on it.
Yeah.
So, all right, guys. So that is the quick down and dirty history of the WEDWAY People Mover. I just wanted to kind of give it's one of my favorites. It has been since I was a kid. I loved it when I was, 11-year-old Dewey going through, Magic Kingdom for the first time. I've always loved it. I've been on basically each iteration. I'm pretty sure I was on it when it still had the Jack Wagner narration in '85, and I know I was there for the the paging Mr. Tom Morrow version and all those things when they changed it to the TTA and everything. So what do you guys think? Do you guys have any specific memories or anything you want to share about the People Mover? Is this something that you guys hit every time when you go to the parks, or do you just do it if there's no line, you hop on it? What's your affinity towards the People Mover? I'll let you go first, Tony.
Well, I always used to jump on that whenever there was no line, especially at night and during the day when you were waiting to go between attractions. It was always one of my favorite places to just see the park, see the action. I'm not really much of a parade goer, but we would watch the parades from up there sometimes as well, and just be somewhere where you can see all of the action of the park all at once. It's just kind of fun. In 1999, I made a quick trip to Disneyland. And the very first ride that I ever went on there was their iteration of the People Mover, which at the time, as we discussed, had become the rocket rods. You said it changed its name to?
Rocket rods.
They had changed it into this very high power thing. And Ron, it's kind of funny that you were mentioning that you don't remember it being herky jerky, because my memory of the one that I went on in Disneyland, those rocket rods were not only extremely fast moving, but it kept jerking our seats so much and I think that's the reason that they decided that it had to be taken down. But at the time, it was just a little bit too fast, too herky jerky when they did the renovation of their Tomorrowland over there. But I always love the People Mover, and what's weird too is it's kind of another version of the monorail, but here in the city, when I used to live in New York City, there would be an air train, they called it, that went above ground. And every time I'd look up, I'd always think of Disney World, because I think of it as being like the People Mover or the monorail. It's kind of fun to think that this technology that was thought of as being something for tomorrow is actually being used in cities across the country today.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I know. I've never been to Disneyland just yet. It's certainly on my bucket list, but I'm really sad that the original Disneyland version of the People Mover is gone, because I would have loved to. First of all, I would have loved to have done it because it used that original, that rubber tire system that they used at the World's Fair. So I think that would have been pretty cool to experience, because obviously I wasn't alive in 1964 or 65 when the World's Fair was there. So I didn't get to travel, and I didn't get to see the Ford Magic Skyway that was the Disney created attraction for Ford. So I would have loved to have been able to jump on the Disneyland version of the People Mover, but unfortunately they they closed that for the rocket rods, and then rocket rods didn't stay around very long because, as you and I, Tony, we talked about it earlier. The People Mover attraction it's a slow moving, slow moving tour around Tomorrowland, and that was how those support beams were built, to support a slow moving attraction.
Yeah.
And when they tossed those gigantic rocket rod cars on there, and I mean, they like did wheelies and, high speed.
It was, I remember it being,
it
was very high speed. I was surprised about that. I didn't expect that, especially since I thought at the time that was the original park. It was not going to have anything that much more advanced than what we had back on the East Coast. But it was very herky jerky. I remember that.
Well, it didn't last long either, because they found that those high speed elements that they added with rocket rods added stress to the support beams, and it wasn't designed to do that. So it was no longer safe to keep that. So unfortunately, the People Mover track, it's still there. It's still an elevated track around Disneyland, but it's been sitting empty for close to 2 decades. So that's unfortunate. I've seen pictures of the load and unload area, and it's circular, just like the People Mover in Disney World. And it just sits there vacant and just collecting dust. So that's kind of crazy.
You made me think about something when I'm remembering what those cars look like and what the Disney World ones started to look like at one point. So they were trying to make the 2000s look like what everyone had expected it to look like back in the 30s and 40s, and that's why I'm saying Jules Verne. It reminds me of the trip to the moon, those spaceship designs that they had back then.
Absolutely. Well, that.
Oh, in France, they have that thing.
Yes, absolutely. That's right. I mean, even in Tomorrowland back in Disneyland, that they already knew that Tomorrowland was a problem, because as soon as you built something for Tomorrowland, tomorrow was yesterday, by the time they got it built. So it was always behind. So even when they built it in Disney World, they ran into that problem with Mission to the Moon originally. By the time they built it in 71 and it opened in 71, we'd already gone to the moon.
Yeah.
And space travel, I guess you could say, was kind of routine. So they had to change it to Mission to Mars. So the theming of Tomorrowland has always been troublesome. So that's why in Disney World, they went to the new Tomorrowland and tried to make it this whole alien interplanetary thing. So it was no longer trying to chase the technology of what we think tomorrow is going to be like. And that's a lot of some of the same problems they ran into in Future World in Epcot Center, is that, by the time they built it, it was no longer tomorrow. It was no longer the future.
But one has to wonder, did we stop wondering what tomorrow is going to be like now that we achieved a lot of those dreams and thoughts that they had back in the day? It almost seems as everybody just gave up on thinking of what, or imagining what a tomorrow might be like now.
I don't know if we've given up on thinking about tomorrow. What I do know they've given up on is spending that much money to rehab an area, to have it only be out of date or obsolete by the time that the rehab is complete. So again, that's why they went to the new Tomorrowland in 94. And then you mentioned in Paris, at Disneyland Paris, they don't have a Tomorrowland. It's actually called Discoveryland in Disneyland Paris. And that whole land is very much that retro steampunk Jules Verne
that's
kind
the
of
word,
vibe.
yeah.
Yes, I've been to Disneyland Paris. It's been, it was 2005, so I remember it, but it's not as clear as I wish it was. But I do definitely remember the steampunk vibe. I mean, there's Space Mountain, super cool. It's shaped like Space Mountain, but it's gold and brass and steampunk. It's super cool. But you're right. They stopped trying to focus on what tomorrow was going to be, and because by the time you build it, it's no longer tomorrow. So that's definitely some of the things.
Expense to build something that is not in existence today and to dream it. There's a lot of cost to that. And even like the monorail system that was so forward thinking, you can't even build that without it costing. I think costs are just deafening the opportunity for us to see the future.
Well, I know that back in the 80s, when they were talking about possible extensions of the monorail system and monorail track taking you to, then the MGM studios and stuff, I remember the quote was always, "It's so expensive, it's $1 million a mile," and all this stuff. And I've heard someone from the Disney company, I don't recall now who it was, but someone from the Disney company had said, look, if it was as cheap as $1 million a mile, we'd build it. It's definitely way more expensive than $1 million a mile to add monorail track. And that's why we never got it. But I guess the Skyliner system must be cheaper than building a monorail, because we actually did get that. So, as cool as the monorail is, I guess it's cost prohibitive, just like rehabbing Tomorrowland all the time. It's just, very expensive. So that's why we have the different looks on whatever Tomorrowlands are around the different parks around the world.
Absolutely.
So, all right, guys, that's it. That's awesome. That is the end of the WEDWAY People Mover segment. I hope you guys enjoyed that, both Ron and Tony, and you, the listener. Hope you guys love the WEDWAY People Mover or the Tomorrowland Transit Authority Metroliner Blue Line, or the TTA, or the Tomorrowland Transit Authority People Mover. I hope you love that attraction. We do. We love it here over at the WDW Reflections podcast. So thank you for joining us for that main segment of this week's show.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Listen to the complete show on your favorite podcast streamer. Follow us on social media at WDW Reflections Podcast. See you real soon.
Tomorrowland Transit Authority Metroliner non-stop, now departing Rocket Tower Plaza Station for a round-trip Super Skyway tour.